All right, everybody. Thank you for waiting. Sorry for last time we had this scheduled. I think it was last month, and I got sick and overslept, so I really hate doing that sort of thing. But today we are joined by Dr. Patty. She is writing a book called, well, it's actually under review through the publisher, Intersection of Intensity, Exploring Giftedness and Trauma. She also is the founder of the Bright Insight organization for gifted people, right? Like a coaching thing for them.
Resource sharing, advocacy.
Resource sharing. She also has a Bloomers Facebook group that is for gifted people and people who are 2E or twice exceptional. Anything else you'd like to mention that I missed?
I want to do a shout out to California Brainwaves. I'm on their neuroscience advisory board as a 2E specialist. That's twice exceptionality again. Work at Cochise College in Sierra Vista. New Day Farmstead's my farm. So lots of stuff, lots of different hats.
Okay, and I've seen those free mom hug stickers around too. What is that about?
Yeah, Free Mom Hugs is an organization. It's basically an advocacy organization aimed at offering support for the GLTBQ plus community, and acknowledging that a lot of times many in that community lose some parental support. And so kind of that's where the idea of the Free Mom Hugs comes from.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
And it's my first guest that's actually in Arizona like I am. So we're not too far away, like an hour and a half. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So you're an INFJ as you tested, but you said that you're an INFP in the past with the Kiersey temperament disorder. You want to kind of explain your journey, your typology, and what kind of knowledge you have on it?
Yeah, so please understand me, and please understand me too. Were books that came out, many years ago. And that was my first introduction to Myers-Briggs types temperament sorting. Through the Kiersey temperament sorter, I was initially actually identified as an ENFP. And I think I was more authentically an INFP. However, back then, the questions were like, do you run for the phone to answer the phone if someone's calling? And I absolutely did. And therefore was identified as an extrovert. But I did that because my home life was not fantastic. And so by running to the phone and answering, I increased my odds of getting out of the house. So yeah, so the E was a lot of masking and a lot of doing what I could to fit in or to get out.
Yeah.
So
and that's a big.
Sorry,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say the perceiving just naturally shifted to judging over time. And that's, having kids. Oh, I have an attack fly. Having kids, just my personal adulthood journey turned me from one to the other.
Okay, definitely a lot of theories on that. People who are watching at home, if you can let us know if the audio is bad, I think I'm having some echo issues. I could try to correct it. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll get to them eventually. We're not going to focus too much on typology today. We're mostly going to talk about her research. She is a PhD and she works at Cochise College in Sierra Vista, like she said. So what is your research, your dissertation? This is a new thing too. You just got your PhD, if I understand right.
That's correct. Yeah. Yay.
Congratulations.
Yeah, quite a journey. My dissertation was on the navigation of adolescence for twice exceptional individuals, and working off a risk and resiliency framework. So the understanding that people had difficulties, and strengths, and potentially, that would lend to what that path looked like. And what resulted was an identity development theory that wasn't just based on adolescence. However, adolescence is a time for a lot of us when we are developing our sense of identity and kind of shaping who we are. So, the thought is that's what presented from that. And I can certainly explain more. I don't know what your audience would need explained though. So you can tell me more about that as far as, do you want me to, explain 2E? I really do have a fly that's like all over me right now. I apologize if you see me swooping around.
That's okay. Arizona has a lot of bugs, so I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely going to touch on 2E again. I had some people who are, gifted, autism, ADHD, all sorts of walks of life on this show, but you can definitely explain it just for anybody who might be tuning in and doesn't know.
Yeah, fantastic. So basically, if we're looking at like neurodiversity, you're looking at twice exceptional is, gifted, and then a second exceptionality or second neurodivergence being, like you listed some there, ADHD, autism. I've not formally assessed ADHD myself. However, I'm very much ADHD. I also have dyslexia, some auditory processing stuff. So that makes me twice exceptional. Also, and anything basically that allows your brain to function differently than the norm, and that's everybody, right? However, like, some amount of standard deviation from the norm, where you have struggles that are different than a lot of people's in two areas, giftedness and that second exceptionality.
Yeah, I've been kind of exploring that a lot. I was supposed to get an eval for autism, but it didn't happen. There was some miscommunication there. Gifted, possibly. I don't know. I resonate a lot with that. I mean, I just kind of went through the motions when I was with school because I didn't want like all the attention and responsibility and expectation on me. So and like when I got higher, like I watched a video of that healthy gamer about giftedness, and he was sitting there talking about like how you kind of breeze through school. Then once you get to college and like started learning more advanced, you kind of like, you don't have study habits. You don't really know. You just can't breeze through it anymore.
Yeah.
That kind of resonates with me a lot. I am diagnosed with avoidant personality disorder. I've seen some cluster B personality disorders under that 2E umbrella, but
sure,
I'm definitely not neurotypical. I'll say that.
Right. Yeah, and certainly personality disorders would fall under the well, it's another neurodivergence, right? So yeah, definitely that would be 2E. Now that said, not all of us breezed through school, even if we are gifted. So and sometimes that's because of that second exceptionality. Sometimes that's a lack of support. There could be, obviously any number of reasons why that's the case.
Yeah, I don't know. Arizona has a pretty poor education system. I don't know if you grew up here or what, but that could be a part of why I breezed through school. But I've seen a lot of people definitely struggle.
Sure. Yeah.
So what got you interested? I know you said that you're 2E yourself. What made you say, I want to go get a PhD in research and, help people with this?
Right. Well, my path is a little different than some. I was identified gifted in elementary school. However, I was identified when my parents sent me in for remediation, so special ed, sort of thing. And they're like, "Oh, actually, Patty's gifted." And they're like, "No way, what?" So, so I went through elementary through high school with the gifted identification. However, my other exceptionalities weren't identified. So basically they thought I was just really lazy. And so there was that stigma there where they didn't expect a whole lot from me. I did end up going to college when I was 19. I took a gap year and actually went out, though I very quickly dropped out of college the first time around. I just wasn't ready for it. It wasn't important enough to me at that point. And I was in for education. I realized I don't really want to be a teacher. I love teaching, but I didn't want to teach in public school. So had kids. Both of my children are twice exceptional. And questionably, though not out of the question, that my husband may be also, but became involved with schools and doing different jobs, became a EMT and worked as a school nurse with my EMT and stuff like that. And just saw a library teacher, saw a lot of stuff. And so I went into school initially to become a therapist, and that's with a master's. So my master's is in clinical mental health counseling. However, I knew that I needed to keep going. Part of that is that my husband is 100% disabled. retired from the Air Force, and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to work outside the home. So I figured getting my PhD so I could teach, so I could write, so I could do those sorts of things with a little bit more ability to market myself. So part of it is just for the letters, to make myself more marketable. And I always joke that I'd hang my PhD above my toilet, because I like to poke fun, and this is just, anyways, to keep it light and keep me from thinking I'm so much better because I have a PhD. Yeah. Unfortunately, I actually went to do that when I got my PhD, when I actually got my diploma, and I didn't realize they're so much bigger than a master's diploma, and it didn't fit above my toilet. So that was the biggest bummer. But anyways, that's why I went that direction. And ultimately also just to be that much more of a therapist and a coach, across state lines and such.
Very cool. I've dropped out of school, went back many times. I sound real bad at feedback in here. Hope everyone can hear me at home. Let me know if there's any issues lately. And I'm contemplating going back. I have a program. I don't know if you're familiar with the vocational rehab for people with disabilities to go back. But I'm having trouble. So I don't know. I want to get my PhD too. I've considered it, but then again, it's like, do I really need it? Especially with the internet and this and that. A lot of him-hawing. I'm almost 40, and I feel like I'm almost 39. I feel like I'm behind. So
yeah, and a lot of us feel that way. You know what? I can say there's great value into going back later. You're just in a different headspace, I think. Having that much more life behind you, and that's not to say the people that did it when they were younger aren't amazing. It's just I do appreciate having done it later.
I hear a lot of people who tried it, like, the ones who decide to accept people into graduate programs prefer older candidates because of life experience and maturity and this and that. And
yep. And they don't drop out. They're like, I'm doing this now. I don't dare drop out. I'm putting this money into this. Yeah. Better retention rates. So also, helpful.
Hopefully if the stars align and I do decide to go back, that'll work in my favor at least.
Yeah, right, exactly.
All right. So you're having your book reviewed by publishers as we speak, Intersection of Intensity, Exploring Giftedness and Trauma. What, besides, I guess the obvious, would you give us a little details about it or what you can?
Sure, absolutely. Well, with it being an intersection of intensities, I look at both of those separately at first. I really dive into what giftedness is and not just the cognitive aspects. I look at non-cognitive aspects of giftedness. We look at overexcitabilities. I usually go on some sort of rant, whether written or verbal, about meaning making and pattern finding for gifted individuals. It's not just smart, So really define and look at different definitions of giftedness, then define and look at different definitions of trauma also. And then start to just really look at those different elements of trauma, different elements of giftedness, and how they interact with each other, qualitatively and quantitatively. Mostly qualitatively, though. How situations are different for gifted individuals.
And you think is like trauma something that people who are gifted face a lot? Is that just because of being different?
Yes and no. And I will explain that. So there's some people that use the word gifted trauma. I don't particularly like that, actually, because it suggests that because a person is gifted, they're more prone to being traumatized. And that can be argued. Certainly lots of gifted individuals report being bullied. However, there's lots of individuals from lots of other groups that also report a high level of bullying. So I wouldn't say that's exclusive to gifted individuals. For twice exceptional individuals who also have disabilities of some sort, there's also a higher level of bullying or difficulty or trauma for disabled persons for any number of reasons. So yes, there can be a different sort of level of exposure to trauma. However, again, gosh, that can be said for so many populations. So I do attend to that. However, in the book, we talk more about how gifted individuals experience the world. So, and I might use an example in the book about like a car accident and how somebody with certain overexcitabilities, for example, may have different, may take in a different amount or depth of data. And that data gets processed and coded different in their brain. And so, that idea of trauma coding or coding information for recall later on. And so if we have coded as a gifted person, coded that much more data in our brains, we may connect it more readily, which increases an opportunity also for like PTSD, or CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, because we're making those connections and we're going, oh gosh, this reminds me of that car accident I had, 10 years ago. And again, I can go more into detail if you want me to, but that's the surface level gist of it. I'm realizing my hair is just amazing right now. Okay. Anyway, sorry.
Oh, looks better than my hair, or lack of thereof, I guess. So kind of what you explained, like the pattern recognition is pretty much what they sum up like as intuition and typology.
It can be. Yeah, definitely.
Do you see like sensors that are gifted a lot, or do you kind of acknowledge any typology in that aspect, or?
That is a wonderful thing to question and debate. I wouldn't say, like, there's a belief that most autistic individuals are INTPs. Sorry, INTJs, not INTPs. However, the research is not robust, right? The empirical evidence is not robust. As far as lived experience, my daughter is autistic and she is an INTJ. So, the pattern matches up there. As far as gifted individuals, I tend to see more N types. And lately more IN types, as introversion is becoming, I think, more legitimized as not a pathology. We used to look at being introverted as, there's something wrong. Yeah. And we're really letting go of that in a beautiful way in society, I think. So I do tend to see a lot of INs now in the gifted community. Now, is that because there's more INs, or are there more INs that are attracted to my bloomers groups and the table talks that we do once a month? It's really hard to say. But and that intuition, is that not pattern finding and meaning making? Quite possibly. So there may be a correlation there. It's a hard one. I'm sure you're familiar. The Myers-Briggs typology isn't super well supported by science, by empirical science. And I tend to think that that's because of the S in there. We haven't nailed down the S as well. And also, like I said, we're legitimizing the I now. So, is there more to be done? Absolutely. But yeah, I'd hesitate to say there's one type than another in the gifted population.
Yeah, I think the big problem with that too is the S doesn't really see the N if it isn't developed. We all have intuition and sensing in our cognitive stack, but there's preferences, and a lot of times people just, if it isn't scientifically validated or studied, it isn't real. And I don't think that's a realistic expectation. I think there's a lot more we don't know than we do know.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely agreed.
All right, Mamu, she's asking, is unhealthy perfectionism related to giftedness?
Well, sure. I mean, I could probably draw links to anything and my guess is that Mamu is asking this because they've noticed something before, right? Now, unhealthy perfectionism. If we were to operationalize that term, define it, what is it? It's a perfectionism that probably causes distress. I I'd be willing to say a lot of perfectionism causes distress. However, there may be people with experiences of being perfectionists where it's not distressing to them. So I'm going to assume that she or they are meaning, perfectionism that causes distress. I do see that in the gifted population. And I think part of that is when we operate at a high level compared to maybe, I'm going to generalize and say the neurotypical population. There's a lot of connections happening. There's a lot of, if you put and they have done MRI studies and fMRI studies with gifted persons, and there's increased white and gray matter in the brain. And so we have a lot going on neurologically, maybe a higher quantity. And that translates to a different quality. And when we're functioning, I feel like I'm talking in circles and haven't finished the sentence. I apologize. When we are used to functioning at such a high level, sometimes it becomes expected of us. So there's these external factors where maybe parents, maybe other adults, maybe peers are expecting a lot from us, and we feel like if we don't deliver that, we are going to let people and ourselves down. And so there's a drive for perfectionism because of that. A lot of times there's also an internal drive. There's this idea that I can do more, therefore I should. Is that completely internal, or is it socially constructed? Hard to say. I would say a lot of it's socially constructed based on expectations, and I think what we've done to the gifted population a whole lot is made the mistake of saying, oh, you've got to support them because they may cure cancer. Well, I mean, if a gifted person does cure cancer, I am all for it. However, when we hang our hat on just what they can produce, what a person, they have to be supported because they may be the person that solves all the world's problems. That's a heavy load for a kid to carry. If we're doing that to them young, it's a heavy load for an adult to carry. And we do that to ourselves, I think, because of those expectations. Oh, I need to produce. If I don't produce, I'm not a person of value. So that was a huge monologue.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That summed it up perfectly. I think that's kind of like when I was a kid, like I didn't really want that expectation of, having more work and more expectations and stuff like that. I was very introverted, and I have a lot of trauma up in my upbringing as well. You tell us about Bright Insight. That's something that you founded, right?
Correct. Yeah. Not solely. Myself and a gifted education teacher in the Tucson area started Bright Insight because we saw a need for support for the gifted community, not only the students who are being supported, some in school certainly, however, also educators, parents, other individuals in the community who, they were exposed to giftedness and they didn't know that much about it and didn't know how to be supportive of gifted individuals. And so we started this organization to advocate for this group, to support this group, to offer resources, to make connections, to fill gaps. And we would meet once a month at a local coffee shop, Roadrunner Coffee Shop, if you're familiar.
Which one is it?
Roadrunner Coffee Shop.
I remember that's kind of on the northwest side, right?
Got it. Northwest side. Yeah. So we started meeting there. And once a month, and we had, sometimes we had guests come and talk to the group. However, always we would have a topic to talk about in relation to giftedness. And that grew. And then during the pandemic, we became more remote, basically. And what happened is we expanded very rapidly. The individual who's the gifted education specialist is focusing on that and on her school district. So she's no longer with Bright Insight. However, it's, her influence is definitely still there as an educator, because I definitely go the more, psychological, psychotherapeutic route, where she was more the education side of things. So like I said, that influence is still certainly there. And now we have, a couple Facebook groups. We have a website and a blog. We have some different programs that we're trying to launch, including like a mentorship program. And then I offer a free resource, basically like a therapist finding program where if somebody's looking for a gifted specialist, that somebody who specializes in giftedness, twice exceptionality, I can help connect them nationally, internationally.
I was talking to somebody on Facebook about coaching. I don't know if it was you from Bright Insight, but something I'd definitely like to look into, kind of have some experience with stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's me. Usually if you talk to Bright Insight, you get me.
Okay. All right. What's up, Oflamo? Nice for you to join us. Mamu has another question. Thanks. What inspires your book?
Oh, this book is, I think, over 60. Yeah, it's well over 60,000 words, 340 pages, I think, of trauma and giftedness. Also going into post-traumatic growth, some of those topics also. What inspires it? Well, I'm a trauma therapist. I do a lot with EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And that's been my focus for many years. And I realized the overlap between trauma and giftedness was not fully explored, though there's a lot of need and a lot of interest there. So I started presenting on it several years ago. Different conferences. I did an online workshop for folks actually during the pandemic because it was a great way to, a great use of our time at home. So I had a running PowerPoint for this that I had used many, many times. And I knew as soon as I had my PhD and could market myself a little more in that regard, that I would be creating this book. I already had a publisher ready to go with it. So and anxious to put it out there because it is, like I said, it's a much needed topic. But basically, this book wrote itself in about 2 months is all it took for me to write it. And that's with a couple weeks in there easily where I couldn't write it all for health reasons or family things going on. So I probably could have written this book in about 6 weeks. Really? Yeah, my mentor and friend said it's like those, like the information was desperate to get on the page, and I said it absolutely was. So yeah, it's I don't know, I couldn't not write it, if that makes sense.
Definitely another goal of mine is to write at least one book. I just don't even see how to do it. I don't know. It seems like a pretty daunting task to me.
Man, the moment you have something that needs so desperately to get on the page like this, man, I've tried to start so many books. This one, like I said, it practically wrote itself because I am so passionate about the topic. I am very knowledgeable about the topic, and it's desperate to be out there. So, yeah.
All right. I am going through EMDR therapy. I'd like to kind of discuss, like, the ins and outs of it and let people know what it is. I think it's a very hard process. I mean, a lot of people, it's like easy peasy, I understand, but if you have a lot of deep rooted trauma, I think it's a little more of a journey.
It can be, and different neurotypes struggle with it differently also. So do you want me to attend to that topic?
Yeah, we'll touch on a little bit, like what it is exactly and how it works.
So right now you would like me to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. I swear I'm paying attention. Okay, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing developed by the late Francine Shapiro came to be when she was taking a walk after dealing with some difficult stuff in her life. And she realized as she was walking and her feet were going back and forth, her eyes were also moving as she was processing the difficulties she was experiencing, like mentally processing. And so she realized that there was something to that bilateral stimulation, that back and forth cross of midline. And so she did some more research and some pretty actual intense research to find out if there was something there. And certainly there was. So EMDR involves not so much eye movements, although that's how it's usually done, but it's really some sort of bilateral stimulation that causes this dual processing. So basically, there's a busying of the brain where your eyes are going left and right that actually lends to a de-arousal process. So your brain goes into delta, these delta waves, and it allows you to process other parts of memories or information in your mind in a way where you don't stop yourself from doing it. Because with trauma especially, a lot of times what happens is we'll get to something difficult and our brain goes, no, that's too hard. I need to protect myself from that. So the bilateral stimulation keeps you from basically, using that coping skill that's probably no longer serving you in relation to that information. So yeah, that's and you go through it and your brain naturally processes it in a way that helps you store it away, and you have a different relationship with it after that. Now, for different neurotypes, it can happen differently. I know for a lot of autistic individuals who may have aphantasia, there may be difficulty accessing visual recall. And so sometimes that bilateral stimulation has to happen differently. So do you want me to explain any part of that? I'll just be quiet and let you talk.
Oh, no, you're doing fine. Aphantasia, what is that exactly?
Yeah, so aphantasia is basically when you can't see in your mind's eye or you have difficulty doing it. For example, if you say, picture an apple in your mind, I can picture an apple, no problem. If I ask somebody with aphantasia to picture an apple, they may think they're doing it because they've been told their whole life, picture this. And to them, that means they're going to conceptualize it. I was just talking to a friend recently who said she could picture it. However, it was a cartoon. When I picture an apple, I picture an actual apple, like every little dent and ding in it, discoloration or color of it. I can roll it off a table. I can hear it squished on the ground. Like this all works like a movie for me. So for me, if I'm processing trauma and being asked to visualize something, I can visualize every part of it. Someone with aphantasia, if I'm saying, hey, picture this, they're going, oh, okay, and it doesn't really, it's like, why am I bothering picturing something I conceptualize? And again, people who have aphantasia aren't always aware that they are seeing things differently in their mind than people who aren't aphantastic. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually. It's interesting that autistic people struggle with that. I was reading Temple Grandin's book. I jump around from book to book lately about visual thinking, and she's like, the autistic spokeswoman, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Got a few questions. Oh, a flame will just commented on that. My autism and Temple Grandin's autism are completely different. The category is worthless. Not sure what you mean by that.
I want to be very careful. Temple Grandin started talking about autism before the neurodiversity movement. And there's a different understanding since that started. And so the person that just commented may also be sensitive to that, reality. A lot of the actually autistic community does not any longer see Temple Grandin as their spokesperson that they align with. She has been very meaningful to some people, and for some people, not so much. So yeah, I may kind of get where that person's going with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so diverse. It's such a huge spectrum. There's no two autistics that are the same.
There's no two people, right? So,
Yeah.
We talk about autistic or you talk about giftedness. It's like, what's the best career field for a twice exceptional person? Well, it depends on the twice exceptional person, right?
Yeah, it's just like typology. People try to cookie cutter. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Right. We're getting some more questions from the audience, which I like. Thank you. Mamu has another one. I believe Carl Jung said some of the best psychologists are wounded healers. Is that a form of giftedness and trauma?
Fantastic question. I love the concept of the wounded healer, as long as we're focusing on the healer and not the wound. And what I mean by that is, certainly the career of, therapists have been stigmatized as actually going into the field because they needed to do their own work and figure out themselves. Now, if that's done from a very honest place where then we are using that to benefit others and the focus is on others, that's a wonderful thing. I consider myself a wounded healer. And certainly it's a valid thing. With giftedness and trauma, with the research I did find that most of the people who were twice exceptional, who had a significant amount of trauma, they were more likely to go into helping professions. And so, you know, it's, I don't want to say it's rare for somebody to have no problems and then go into a healing profession. Sometimes that creates a drive in us to use what has happened to then inform what we do to support others. So I don't know if that answered the question, though.
Did for me, for sure. I kind of have that, like, I have a really, really hard time around people with the avoidant personality disorder and possible autism, but I do have an inclination to help people too.
Sure.
So it's kind of like this dichotomy. It's kind of inside me, ripping me apart in a weird way.
Sure.
Yeah. I also have an astrology channel, speaking of wounded healers and Chiron. You guys could check out Astrotype that I haven't really done much in a while. We have another one. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. Nami. Is EMDR more effective to treat PTSD treatment than compared to other trauma treatment approaches?
My quick answer is yes. However, my quick answer is not really a good answer. What I have seen is that EMDR is effective in a way I've not seen with other treatment modalities. It can. Let me back up. I've done EMDR as a client, and the reason I became an EMDR therapist is because I was an EMDR client. Talk about wounded healer, right? I went into it very skeptical. I was open but skeptical. So I was prepared for it to not work. I wasn't expecting it to work. I was open to trying it, and I did everything I was told to do. And my gosh, it worked. It worked in ways I didn't imagine. And what my therapist told me at that time was that I said, well, I'm coping with this stuff fine. I've always coped with my traumatic upbringing just fine. And she said, you don't have to cope. You can process it so you don't have to cope with it. And I'm going, whoa, what? That's not even a thing, right? And I was already a therapist when I was doing EMDR. So, you know, me thinking, you know, I had it all figured out, but, you know, I had these things that were starting to bug me. So I'm like, okay, you know, therapist, heal thyself. And then what I've seen with clients is I have clients who've come to me with just atrocious amounts of trauma and the quality, or even a single traumatic experience that you cannot imagine getting over. And they come in destroyed by this trauma. And I had one individual, 2 EMDR sessions. And she went from having this traumatic and truly traumatic experience that she could not move forward from to being able to look back at it and go, yeah, that happened. Okay. And I'm like, wait a second, what? And it still surprises me, you know, so many years later after having started, you know, EMDR. So I would say that it is a profoundly effective tool. I would hate to say it's the only one, and I would hate to say that it's going to work amazingly for everyone. It depends on you. It depends on your practitioner. It depends on the point in your life. Are you ready? Is your brain ready to go there? You know, so there's a lot of different variables. I say if you have trauma, if you have anxiety, if you're ready to process rather than cope, it may be a worthwhile avenue to explore.
Yeah, I've been in therapy for a very, very long time, like 10, 12 years. And I've been doing EMDR maybe like a year and a half, 2, with a lot of breaks in between because it can be a rough process. And I'd say that EMDR has been more beneficial than all those years of therapy. And I have my fair share of trauma. So, but they do test, like, before you do it, like how much you disassociate, and you disassociate too much, then it's not suggested. And I was kind of like on the cusp of being too high.
Yeah.
All right. Flame was asking, have you read House of Cards, Psychology and Psychotherapy Built on Myth by Robin Dawes?
I have not. And I don't know what more I can say about that since I haven't read it.
Yeah.
Have
I
you?
haven't either.
Okay.
No. Mamu, another question from her. Some of the ACEs studies suggest 10% of the population have suffered trauma. Why do some of these people become gifted?
Oh, I would argue that they don't. So I would argue that giftedness is more innate. It's not necessarily caused. Also, I would say more than 10% of the population experience trauma. So the ACEs is a wonderful tool. It was a groundbreaking tool. It's also normed very European, very white, probably male, though I don't know that one for sure. So it's not a perfect tool, nor do we actually know, how many people have trauma. Yeah, I would venture to say more than 10% now that we have a more broad understanding of what trauma is. So, but yeah, I don't think giftedness is caused by trauma.
Yeah, I think everybody has trauma of some shape or form.
Yeah, certainly. Or we've had traumatic experiences, and for some of us, it causes trauma, and for some of us, it causes a difficulty. And some of that may come down to, did you have secure attachments as a child? If you didn't have secure attachments, you may go through something that then traumatizes you, whereas somebody else with secure attachments, they're like, oh gosh, that was hard. I'm glad I have some good people around to help me, So there's also that aspect of it. For gifted individuals, sometimes they attach more meaning or different meaning in different ways. And with different overexcitabilities, like let's say a person has an emotional overexcitability, which means they feel emotions more or experiencing them different, higher duration, frequency, intensity than the average person. And then that person who goes through something traumatic, their emotional memory of it may be more intense. And so, and as you can imagine, if you're that much more scared or that much more sad, how is that coding in your brain? So,
yeah, I get it. Just feel things more intensely, think about things more intensely, and it could affect you in a different way.
Yeah.
That's why I say, like, I don't really like to brag about it, but like being highly intelligent. I thought I'd probably like above average, maybe if I tested. I never officially took it, but it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And being double-edged, there's that we experience it more intensely part of it. However, there's also, a great potential for internal resourcing, for problem solving, for, that sort of thing. And I'm not saying all gifted people are so much better at solving problems, or all gifted people are this or that. It's just, we know that there is some propensity, again, that pattern finding may expose us to more traumatic material, or may make trauma or material feel more traumatic. However, it also exposes us to solutions sometimes.
Yeah. Hi, Robert. Thank you for joining us. Someone from the Bloomers group, I think.
Fantastic.
So, I mean, I think a problem with this is that with the neurodivergence, with it going out, it's great and everything, but a lot of people who aren't typically neurodivergent, I guess everybody probably is in one shape or form. There's gonna be a lot of people who aren't neurodivergent claiming they are neurodivergent, and it gets kind of convoluted. Do you think that could be an issue?
Oh man, I wish my daughter was here. Her and I go back and forth about this a lot. It's a mixed bag, right? I would hate for, let me back up. I don't like when people say stuff like, oh, I had an ADHD moment, or I had an OCD moment. Oh, you're so bipolar because somebody had strong emotions, and using that as a negative label, right? So we have that aspect of it where the neurodiversity movement is trying to destigmatize, divergencies. However, there's also, we're starting to legitimize self-diagnosis too, I think more with adults. And with that comes this idea that everybody's neurodivergent, and maybe more people are identifying than need to. That's a hard one for me. Would I love for everybody to be able to get a formal diagnosis if that's what's needed or helpful for them? Absolutely. Especially if it's destigmatized and depathologized such that, hey, this is your neurodifference, not this is what's wrong with you, right? The problem is that not all of us have the privilege of access to that kind of assessment. And not all of us have the emotional space for that kind of assessment. You know, you're talking about a parent who has an autistic kid and they're realizing they're also probably autistic. They're going to put their money towards getting their kid assessed, not them. Mm-hmm. You know, does it mean that it's not legitimate? You know, if they truly feel they're autistic, if the shoe fits and they're wearing it, is it wrong of them? I don't think it is. Is there a risk of overgeneralizing? Sure. There may be also a social pendulum swing that's happening right now where we were underdiagnosing and now maybe we're overdiagnosing or over-identifying so that people feel like, oh, this is what's wrong with me, you know, and now I have a label so I can feel okay. Yeah, I have a lot, obviously not well-developed feelings about this, right? Because I'm hemming behind a lot. And I also want to be very careful and respectful of different people's perspectives here. Some people are really frustrated with the over-identification and really frustrated with self-identification. And some people are really frustrated with not allowing it. And I think there's validity on both sides of this coin. So I tend to be pretty accepting of what an individual feels like they need to do.
Yeah,
that might be
very controversial. Everybody on the internet has a voice these days, and I think the internet's probably society's biggest double-edged sword. Speaking of double-edged swords,
right? And is that bad? Is that good? I tend to I like taking good and bad labels off of stuff and keeping it pretty neutral. It is. So what are we going to do with it? You know?
Life's a spectrum. Almost everything's on a spectrum, it seems like. What do you think about the future of neurodivergence? What it's going to look like in 10, 20 years?
Are you talking about the neurodiversity movement or neurodivergence as like each individual diagnoses?
Either or, how you kind of picture it.
I think there is a strong desire to depathologize. And basically where we're no longer calling it autism spectrum disorder, right? We're not saying it's a disordered way of being. It's a different way of being. Now, there are people who argue that as an autistic person, they definitely have deficits. Are those deficits going to be there regardless of how society is? Or is it something based on I have a deficit as compared to, you know, this neuromajority, however we're identifying it? It's really hard to say. Ultimately, I like the idea of depathologizing mental health. Although my reasoning tends to align with Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration. And that's a whole nother podcast episode probably. However, I can say that Kamers Dabrowski really sought to depathologize what we would call ailments, maybe depression. Is this a pathology, or is this a sign that somebody is working diligently through life's difficulties and, you know, separating from what's socially expected and finding something authentic? And in doing so, this causes a certain amount of distress or a depressed state of being. You know, it's, I guess there's definitely conversations to be had, right? Yeah. And I think there's some diagnoses in the DSM. I have a love-hate relationship with the DSM-5, right? I think there's definitely some diagnoses in there that cause the person distress, cause the people around them distress. And I don't want to take that lightly. And at the same time, I think we need to be asking, is that distress existent in a vacuum, or is that because of what's socially expected? You know, again, I'd hate to say I know the exact answers. I know there's lots of conversations to be had, and they're important.
All right, very cool. We're running out of time here. You want to talk about your two daughters? One's INTJ and one's an ISFP. Would you like to discuss them and kind of like, their upbringing and your relationship with them?
Oh, sure. Well, I have a wonderful relationship with both my daughters. So the INTJ, that's so funny, the INTJ, she is autistic, late identified. However, we kind of knew it growing up. However, I battled it as a therapist. And she's like, Mom, I'm like, I just don't think you're quite autistic. She's like, Mom, if I was your client and I thought I was, what would you do? And I said, well, we'd probably start by pulling out the DSM-5. There's that love-hate relationship. Pull out the DSM-5 and go through each criteria and just see, just look at it with curiosity. She's like, can we do that? I'm like, of course we can, right? Went through it. She matched up with every single freaking one. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm either the world's worst therapist or the world's worst mother. And she patted me on the back and she was like, no, it's because my mother is a therapist. And of course she's in her 20s. So, we were looking at it, from maybe a pathologizing lens earlier on. Anyway, wonderful, amazing kid. She's in college for architecture now. And sometimes moonlights as a Disney princess. And I mean it because she's actually has a job where she plays different Disney princesses. Anyways, I didn't quite know what to do with her growing up. Being an INFJ, I was more, probably a bit more mainstream, I guess I could say, than an INTJ. And her type is so different than mine. And we had typed her by then, by the way. And back then she was an INTP. She shifted from a P to a J, having gone through some chronic illness stuff. But I remember talking to my sister, who's probably also an INTJ, and she said, whatever you do, don't make her feel like there's something wrong with her. Because I was, this is back when I thought, oh, I need to get her in social circles, social skills groups and stuff like that. That's the worst thing you can do to a poor autistic kid, right? There's nothing wrong with her social skills. They're just different. So she baffled me. However, my sister's advice was wonderful and very correct. A lot of times parents try so hard. Oh, we really need to help them with the skill that society says they need to have. And mistakenly, what we do by doing that is send the message that there's something wrong with them, right?
Yeah.
So, and there was nothing wrong with her. She was amazing. She still is. My other daughter, she is, remind me, she's an what did I say? FP?
ISFP in here?
Yep, ISFP. Yep, my oldest daughter, which is an artist type, right? So we've got the INTJ, who's very much my structure seeker, and I have my ISFP, who's the artist, right? She's a meaning maker. And so I have this other kid who, like, there was this interesting, like, connection to the universe side of her. I don't know quite how to explain it. She's not a hippie by any stretch of the imagination. That was actually probably more me. But just a totally different personality type. And I knew what to do with her, right? She probably butt heads with me more because she's also my strong-willed. They're actually both strong-willed. The younger one masked more. The older one did not. Because the younger one masked, I thought she was probably more agreeable. The older one, like, I saw what I needed to see with her, and probably not more agreeable growing up. However, what a beautiful thing that she didn't mask as much, right? So, she was the more typical strong-willed child. However, maybe a little bit more mainstream. So the parenting books matched up with, oh, what are we supposed to do with a kid like this? Yeah. But very brilliant. Both of them brilliant and totally different. They look different. They act different. So
it's definitely an interesting journey. I'm raising probably an ESFP son, and INTJs and ESFPs kind of don't get along, but we're making it work.
Yeah.
All right. I think we need to wrap this up. So what are 3 books that you suggest?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I tend to recommend Living with Intensity. That one is a phenomenal step into understanding Dabrowski's 5 overexcitabilities, which are present often in gifted individuals. Dabrowski's work wasn't with gifted. However, we've drawn that parallel at this point. Heavily in the gifted community. So it's a really good introduction to overexcitability. The other one, let's see. Of course, my book that's coming out probably in the spring, possibly sooner.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think. I wrote something down before. I'm really loving the Quarter Life book right now. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I'm actually
The
looking
Body
it up.
Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Body Keeps the Score for anybody who's not had exposure to somatic work, maybe some gentle exposure to EMDR and what it's like to understand that we hold trauma in our body. That's a good one. And this one wasn't on my list when you asked me before, but Quarter Life, The Search for Self in early adulthood. That one also is a really good one.
Very cool. If anybody's interested, I did a very, very long breakdown of The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I'll try to remember to link that in the show notes.
Fantastic.
Okay, what would you like others to know about you, your personality type, your diagnosis, your research? Is there anything you'd like to advertise for Dr. Patty?
Oh, for Dr. Patty, this is my pedestal moment, huh?
Yeah.
Definitely be watching for my book. If you look at giftedness as an elitist topic, I encourage people to look at whole person giftedness, the idea that it is a neurodivergency rather than an elitism. I talk in my book about gifted individuals being as elite as a flamingo in Antarctica. Yeah, we're definitely different, definitely we're maybe a little odd to see. However, not better than, right? That's not the goal. So, as far as understanding giftedness, if it's something that's new to you, maybe even just destigmatizing it also. It's not necessarily, it can seem like a poor label. It's something I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about gifted people. I'm passionate about people in general. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. Another question I have is, what would you like to know about INTJs, someone with AVPD? It's kind of a general question I asked, and you wrote something down. I would like to know what they would like me to know, given my strength and focus.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Given my focus as a therapist on giftedness and trauma, on the importance of understanding that there are different neurotypes, what would you like me to know about INTJs, about people with antisocial personality disorder? Because antisocial personality disorder, especially, that one's super stigmatized, right? So,
well, luckily I don't have antisocial personality. I have avoidant personality. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people who do have probably INTJs that do have some antisocial personality disorder. How would you say that's over stigmatized? Do you think they're not all convicts and psychopaths?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I don't like cluster B shaming, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is a hard one. Also, however, in relation to INTJs are often mislabeled as narcissists, mislabeled as, and I know some who have been misdiagnosed as having antisocial personality disorder. So yeah, for me, as far as being stigmatized, sometimes it's the personality type and the difference that's stigmatized. So yeah. Anyways, that's a whole nother one I can go down to. I'm really big on destigmatizing and not cluster B shaming and stuff like that. So, but again,
yeah, I've definitely been called school shooter, serial killer, psychopath. I've been called all that countless times in my life, so I definitely know how that is.
That's really upsetting. I'm sorry you've dealt with that.
Yeah, I guess everybody has their own things they deal with, I suppose.
I suppose, but that one doesn't have to happen if we're better humans all around, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I use this channel for, to explore different mental illnesses with personality type and let people tell their story and, hopefully spread some knowledge and rather shine light on ignorance, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that's all that I got. Do you have anything else?
I just realized that I called INTJs being labeled as narcissists. That said, I'm also wanting to destigmatize cluster B. So I'm like, I think there's a lot to be explored there,
For
and
sure.
I have compassion for anybody with any sort of DSM-5 label. So yeah, that's lead with compassion. Maybe that's where I want to end. Lead with compassion.
There we go. All right. She has a book, Intersection of Intensity, Exploring Giftedness and Trauma, coming out. She said spring. I'd love to read it when it comes out and have you back on to discuss it.
Great.
Check out the Bloomers group in Facebook and Bright Insight. I'll have all those links down below. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.